31 years on the Aldwych Concert Hall's Board of Governors, and I had never once seen a rehearsal stopped by an argument over screwdrivers, which tells you something about the particular Tuesday I mean to describe to you now. I had come to the hall that afternoon for nothing more dramatic than a routine inspection of the new heating system in the upper gallery, a duty considerably beneath the dignity of a board governor, but one I had always rather enjoyed, since it gave me an excuse to wander the building at hours when it stood empty of both audience and orchestra, all echo and dust motes in the afternoon light. I had no intention whatsoever of witnessing anything more consequential than a boiler valve that day. Eleanor Marsh had come to us, I later learned, after a Bristol piano works closed its doors during a downturn no one there had anticipated, taking with it the apprenticeship she had begun at 16 under a restorer who had, by all accounts, recognized her gift early and done everything a modest workshop's resources allowed to nurture it. She had written to every concert hall and instrument maker in 3 counties before Aldwych answered, and Mr. Halloran told me once, with the particular pride of a man who knows he has made the better bargain than he had any right to expect, that her letter of application had included a hand-drawn diagram of a grand action mechanism so precise he had assumed before meeting her that its author must be a man twice her age. The hall's great Steinway had been in the workshop for a fortnight, undergoing the kind of overhaul that happens perhaps once a decade. Every hammer reseated, every string a candidate for replacement, the whole mechanism laid bare under the hands of Miss Eleanor Marsh, our restorer's apprentice, a quiet young woman of 24 whose hands had proven so careful with an instrument that old Mr. Halloran, our chief restorer, had made her his understudy within the month of her arrival, and his equal, in everything but title, within the year. She worked in the basement mostly, among felt and wire and the particular smell of piano lacquer, and I do not believe most of the hall's regular patrons could have told you her name, though every instrument they had ever applauded in that building had passed, at some point, beneath her hands. I had visited that workshop perhaps a dozen times over the years, in my capacity as the board member charged with overseeing the hall's instruments, and I confess I had never paid Eleanor Marsh much particular attention beyond noting, in the vague way one notes competent staff, that Mr. Halloran seemed to trust her with more each visit. She kept the workshop the way I imagine a surgeon keeps an operating theater, every tool in its place, every string gauge labeled, the great disassembled Steinway laid out across 2 long benches like something under careful medical study rather than mere repair. I had seen her once sitting alone at a battered upright the hall kept for testing purposes, playing something quietly to herself after the other workmen had gone home, and had thought nothing of it beyond the passing observation that a great many piano technicians, in my experience, cannot resist a keyboard once the instrument is back together and speaking again. The trouble began the moment Mr. Constantine Aldwych arrived for his final rehearsal. I should tell you what sort of man Aldwych was, in case his name has not reached you, a touring virtuoso of considerable and largely deserved reputation, the kind of pianist whose recitals sold out a hall the size of ours in a single morning, and a man who had built, alongside that reputation, an equally considerable one for a temper that did not survive contact with anything he considered imperfect. Stagehands spoke of him in the particular hushed, wary tone reserved for men whose gifts were real enough to excuse, in their own minds at least, a great deal of unkindness toward everyone whose gifts served theirs. He had, I am told, once halted a rehearsal in Vienna for 40 minutes over a single squeaking pedal, and dismissed a page-turner in Amsterdam mid-concert for the crime of breathing too audibly during a pianissimo passage. He arrived that Tuesday afternoon in a traveling coat still dusted with rain, sat at the restored Steinway without so much as a greeting to the room, and played perhaps 8 bars of a slow passage before he stopped dead, both hands still on the keys, and said, in a voice that carried to every corner of the empty hall, "Who has touched this instrument's voicing?" Mr. Halloran, unwell that week with a chest cold that had kept him abed since Sunday, was not present to answer for himself. It was Eleanor who stepped forward from the wings, wiping felt dust from her hands onto her workshop apron, and said simply, "I did, sir." I want you to understand precisely what she had done, because Aldrich's fury, when it came, was not entirely without grounds, only entirely without proportion. Voicing, for those unfamiliar with the craft, is the fine adjustment of the hammers felt, needling them harder or softer, denser or looser, that determines whether a piano's tone bites or sings, and it is considered, even among restorers, one of the most subjective and jealously guarded judgments in the whole trade. A technician might spend a decade merely assisting on voicing work before a senior restorer trusted their ear enough to let them near a concert instrument unsupervised. The standard voicing for a concert Steinway of that model calls for a brighter, harder hammer strike in the upper register, the sound the manufacturer's own manual specifies and every trained technician in London had been taught to reproduce without variation. Eleanor had voiced the upper register softer instead, warmer, rounder at the edges, a deliberate departure she had made, she told the board later, after listening to Aldrich's own recordings for a solid week and concluding, with the particular quiet confidence of someone who has thought about a problem far longer than anyone has asked her to, that the piece he intended to premiere that season wanted a voice the standard specification could not give it. "You have altered a concert instrument," Aldrich said, rising from the bench, "according to your own taste, without instruction, without consultation, and without, I should imagine, the first idea what you were undoing." His voice had gone very cold and very precise, the tone of a man who has decided contempt is more useful to him than shouting. A craftsman services an instrument. She does not presume to perform through it by proxy. "You have taken it upon yourself to be an artist, miss." He did not know her name and did not pause to ask it, "when you were hired to be a technician." Eleanor did not apologize, and did not explain herself either, which I confess surprised me more than Aldrich's anger had. "The piece wants warmth in that register," she said, "not brilliance. I can restore the standard voicing within the hour if you insist on it." "I do insist on it," Aldrich said, and then, because the room had gone very quiet and because I think some devil of theatrical cruelty overtook him in that moment, he added, "Or since you plainly believe your own judgment superior to a manufacturer's specification and a concert artist's ear both, perhaps you would care to demonstrate it. Sit down, play the piece yourself on your own voicing exactly as you've left it. If the choice you made without permission proves itself in your own two hands, I will withdraw every word I have said and play the instrument as you have left it, publicly, at the premiere. If it does not, if you cannot even produce the sound you claim this voicing was made to serve, I will see to it personally that Mr. Halloran finds himself a new understudy by the end of the month." I heard someone on the board beside me draw breath sharply. It was not by any fair measure an equal wager. The piece in question was Liszt's Few Follets, the fifth of the Transcendental Etudes, a work so notoriously difficult that professional pianists have been known to withdraw it from programs rather than risk it in public, built almost entirely from a double-note tremolo figure that must run, feather-light and unbroken, beneath both hands for nearly 4 unrelenting minutes. It is not a piece one plays to prove a point. It is a piece that ends careers when it goes wrong. A silence followed that I can only describe as the sound of an entire room recalculating its estimate of what was about to happen. 2 of my fellow governors exchanged a glance I did not care for, the particular look of people already composing, in their minds, the awkward letter of dismissal they assumed they would shortly have cause to write. Mr. Halloran's second workman, young Tobias, who had followed Aldrich in from the stage door out of simple curiosity, went pale enough that I thought for a moment he meant to intervene on Eleanor's behalf, though what a 19-year-old apprentice might have said to a man like Aldrich, I cannot imagine. "Very well," Eleanor said. I do not know even now whether she had ever played it before that afternoon, or whether, as I have since come to suspect, knowing what I now know of how she spent her evenings, she had simply spent 3 years in that basement workshop with her hands inside other people's instruments, and had never once told a living soul that her own hands wanted, more than anything, to be inside the music itself. Mr. Halloran told me afterward, once he was well enough to hear the whole story and furious on her behalf in a quiet, controlled way that suited him far better than shouting would have, that Eleanor had been working through the entire Transcendental Etudes alone in the workshop for the better part of a year, in the hour after closing, on whatever instrument happened to be on the bench awaiting collection, never once asking permission, never once mentioning it to him because she had assumed, not unreasonably given everything the hall had ever told her about her own place in it, that no one would think it worth permitting. She sat at the bench Aldrich had just vacated, adjusted the height with the brisk, unthinking competence of someone who has adjusted 1,000 piano benches for other people, and never once for herself, and began. The etude does not announce itself gently. It begins already in motion, a shimmer of rapid double notes so quiet and so fast that the ear cannot quite locate where the sound is coming from, like heat haze rising off a summer road, which is, I am told, precisely the effect Liszt intended. The will-o'-the-wisp flickers the title promises, always moving, never quite where you expect them. Eleanor's hands found that shimmer and held it, both hands trading the impossible figure back and forth with a lightness that seemed to defy the basic mechanics of what fingers are meant to do at that speed. And I understood within the first 10 seconds why she had wanted that particular warmth in the upper register. It was the only voicing that let the tremolo shimmer rather than shriek, the only choice that turned mechanical difficulty into something that sounded astonishingly like weather. Aldrich had gone very still by the piano's side, closer to it than strictly comfortable, the way a man stands when he has stopped trying to catch someone in a mistake and started, despite himself, listening. The piece does not relent. It offers no true rest, no broad singing melody to recover in, only the same impossible figure recast in different registers and different harmonic colors for 4 unbroken minutes, demanding a stamina in the small muscles of the hand that most concert pianists train for years to acquire, and some, wisely, never attempt on a public stage at all. I watched Elinor's forearms, and I confess I do not know piano technique well enough to describe with authority what I saw, except that there was no visible strain in them at all, no clenching, no rigidity, only a fluid, continuous motion that looked, more than anything, like water finding its way downhill by the shortest possible path. Her face throughout wore none of the visible effort I had half expected, no grimace, no gritted concentration, only the same quiet, attentive expression I imagined she wore over a disassembled action in the workshop, as though this too were simply a mechanism she understood completely, and was now, for the first time, permitted to operate rather than merely repair. Somewhere past the second minute, the figure climbs into the instrument's highest register, thin and glittering, exactly the passage where a harder hammer voicing would have turned the sound to ice pick and glare. Under Elinor's hands in her own softened voicing, it turned instead to something like starlight, present, exact, but never once harsh, and I saw Aldrich's hand resting on the piano's closed lid curl slowly into a fist that was not, I understood even then, a fist of anger. The board members around me had gone entirely silent, the particular silence of people who had come prepared to witness a humiliation and found themselves instead witnessing something they did not have the vocabulary to interrupt. Old Mrs. Fenwick-Hale, our longest-serving governor, had both hands pressed to the pearls at her throat. I found I had stopped breathing properly myself somewhere around the second minute and did not trouble to correct it. The etude's final page demands one last impossible acceleration, the tremolo figure driving upward through the whole compass of the keyboard before collapsing, with almost violent suddenness, into 3 bare closing chords, and Elinor took that final climb at a speed that made even Aldrich, a man who had played this exact piece on stages across 4 continents, take an audible breath through his nose, the sound a musician makes when a colleague does something he had believed, until that instant, to be at the very edge of what the instrument allows. The 3 closing chords fell into a silence so complete that I heard, quite clearly, the workshop clock ticking 2 floors below us, and somewhere further off still, a delivery cart passing on the street outside, entirely indifferent to what had just happened inside that hall. Nobody moved for what felt a genuinely uncomfortable length of time. Aldrich stood with his hand still resting on the piano's lid, looking at Elinor Marsh the way a man looks at a door he has walked past every day for years and never once tried to open. "Where," he said finally, quietly, and his voice had lost every trace of its earlier coldness, "did you learn to play like that?" "I didn't," Elinor said. "I learned to listen like that. The playing is only what happens when you've spent 3 years learning exactly what an instrument wants to say, and nobody ever asked you to say it yourself. I will tell you plainly that I have never, in 31 years on that board, seen a man's composure dismantled so completely, and so silently as Constantin Aldrich's was in the minute that followed. He did not apologize in the loud, theatrical way men of his temperament sometimes do, performing contrition as readily as they perform anger. He simply bowed a small, private bow from the waist, at the closed lid of the Steinway itself rather than to the room, and said, quietly enough that only those of us nearest the stage properly heard it, "I withdraw every word." He kept a great deal more than his word that season. He played the premiere on Elinor's own voicing, exactly as she had left it, and had the program printed with a line none of us had ever seen on an Aldrich bill before, instrument prepared by E. Marsh. The critics, who had no idea what quiet argument that single-credit line represented, praised the unusually singing upper register of that night's performance without once suspecting the singing had been decided, months in advance, by a woman 2 floors below the stage they were writing about. He returned the following autumn and asked for her specifically, by name this time, and the autumn after that, and somewhere in the 3 years since I understand a proper professional partnership has grown up between them that neither the Hall's board nor I suspect. Either of them quite anticipated on that furious Tuesday afternoon, Elinor voicing and preparing every instrument he plays in London now, and Aldrich, for his part, having quietly funded a scholarship in her name for young piano technicians who show, in Mr. Halloran's careful phrase, an ear beyond their station. Mr. Halloran retired 2 years later, on terms considerably more comfortable than the Hall had originally budgeted for, at the board's own insistence. And there was never any question among us who ought to take his title. Elinor Marsh is chief restorer of the Aldwych Concert Hall now, the youngest to hold the post in the Hall's long history, and the small workshop plaque that once read simply HALLORAN now reads, beneath his name, hers as well, in letters the same size, which I understand was her own quiet condition for accepting the post at all. I still sit on that board, rather older now and considerably slower up the stairs to the workshop, and I make a point, whenever a new instrument is due for restoration, of going down to watch. I have never again heard anyone in that building suggest that servicing an instrument and understanding its voice are two separate gifts. I watched a woman in a felt-dusted apron prove, in 4 unbroken minutes on a piano she had voiced by her own quiet judgment, that they never were.